All right.
Should we get started, Alyssa?
I think we can get started.
Okay, do you want to kick us off?
I will kick us off. So everyone, thank you for coming to our webinar today. As this welcome panel says, most of our presentation today will actually be a presentation. You are invited to participate by chat, or if you want, raise your hand or just speak out if you have a question. We'll be pausing periodically to ask if you have questions. So feel free to interact in whichever way you feel comfortable. So chat window is great. Speaking out is great. We've also gotten feedback from some people that the chat window can just be too overwhelming. If you don't want to pay attention, just close it. It'll be available in a recording later, so you can look at it later. So that's about it there.
Okay.
So here we are for online team activities and assignments. We're going to be focusing on keeping students on track. My name is Alyssa Bonack, and I teach in the ITA program in the Center for Educational Innovation primarily. And Mary?
And I am Mary Jetter from the Center for Educational Innovation, and I also teach in the International TA program, as well as do a variety of other things with early career, mid-career, the senior teaching fellows, you name it, I'm sort of involved in it probably. So we're really happy that you're taking time on this beautifully hot summer day, at least it's hot if you're in the Twin Cities, to join us.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, so our aims today we have 5 aims. The first is to identify the qualities of an effective team project. Second is to form teams based on a variety of methods. So we'll be sharing some different ways you can choose to form your teams. How you can support positive team dynamics among students to help ensure success. Scaffolding successful team projects is one of our aims, and assessing team output. So those are the 5 things that we'll be covering today. And I think actually the next slide, I'll talk about this. CEI has a guide to team projects. So you'll be able to access this from our slides, which will be sent out afterwards, or you can go to cei.umn.edu/faculty guide. And thanks, Mary, for putting it in the chat. This guide is based primarily on face-to-face classes, and you'll notice that a lot of the examples we give today are from face-to-face classes, but a lot of the principles of team dynamics and team projects are the same. So what we'll do is talk about those today and kind of talk about ways in which online groups might be a little bit different and some other additional considerations. But don't be alarmed if you feel like, well, this is the same as in my face-to-face classes. Yeah, a lot of it is the same. A lot of it is the same.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that in the chat, I put a link to another site, teamwork.umn.edu, and this is the student-facing site. So this has a lot of resources that you can refer students to as they're working through a group project. It helps, there's a lot of resources on communication and on troubleshooting problems that they might, interpersonal problems that they might have. So we have the 2 sites, the instructor focused and then the student focused. Okay, so we're going to start with what I think is kind of a fun activity. So thinking about when you tell students, guess what, we're going to do a group project in this class. How do students often respond? So I go to this link, z.umn.edu/mypoll1. This is going to take you to a site called Mentimeter that allows you to create real-time word clouds based on student responses or participant responses. So go ahead and go on over to this link. It'll give you the option to input up to 3 words or phrases. And then we'll see how everybody responds. And this is, again, part of what we want to do too is also show you some tools and things that you can use in your own classes. So we'll give you about a minute or so to go over there.
And I've put that link in the chat as well.
Yep. 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 Okay. So now I'm going to show you what this looks like from the instructor here. Where did the meeting controls go? Okay. So yeah.
There's a lot of positive adjectives,
Yes.
I see.
Yeah. So what this does is it creates a word cloud in real time, and words that are mentioned more common are in a bigger font size. So some students are excited. That's nice to hear. There's groans. People might be anxious, disappointed, negativity. Oh no, terrified, groan, silence. But great. I like individual projects. Yay, better than individual. So yeah, there's a nice variety here of responses. So again, we wanted to use this tool, one, to show you just some options, to give you some things you can do. This is a free tool and it's really easy to set up. And Mentimeter also allows you to do quizzes and polls and some other really fun stuff. So menti.com is the site when you're responding to something. The full site is Mentimeter, MENTIMETER.com. But yeah, so some people might think it's fun and excited, and some people might be kind of anxious and annoyed, and that's pretty much what we would expect. Okay, so let me go back to the slides now. I talk to myself, sorry, as I'm doing this. Okay. Okay, so maybe you've seen this this image before. So what group projects are supposed to teach you? So in theory, we want group projects, our students, to learn how to work effectively as a team. We want them to collaborate. We want them to learn responsibility or practice responsibility. And we want them to use effective communication skills or develop those skills. But for some students, might be what they think of. What group projects taught me, and in the end, it's trust no one. And a lot of times, this can be because the project maybe wasn't set up well to require students to work together. Maybe it wasn't scaffolded well, so the students didn't have these steps that they had to take along the way to get to know each other and work better. So our goal today in this workshop is that your students will learn teamwork skills, communication, responsibility, and collaboration instead of to trust no one. Okay. So again, here we're start with our first aim, which is what are the qualities of an effective team project? So the benefits of small group learning as compared to students who are taught traditionally, and all of these resources are also on the CEI faculty page that we showed you before. So first benefit, research has shown that students, when they work in groups, they achieve higher grades. They also learn at a deeper level. They retain information longer because they're having to work with it more, probably. They're less likely to drop out of school, and I thought this was a really interesting effect, and I think it has to do with that sense of belongingness, and students who feel like they belong and are connected tend to stay in school more, tend to be more motivated. They acquire greater communication and teamwork skills, and they gain a better understanding of the environment in which they'll be working as professionals, because as we all know, we're all here right now as a group talking about this. And finally, it can reduce stress and anxiety in online settings. And for international students, this can be, all of this can really be especially important. Alyssa and I work with the international TAs. But a lot of times international students might feel isolated in a class. So by being a part of a group activity, they're able to make more connections with each other. Alyssa, do you want to say anything else about that?
I think I'll say, oh, okay, everything's okay. In terms of reducing stress and anxiety, yes, having those connections is helpful. Also, because sometimes being in an online class can seem a little overwhelming because you're not making connections like you do in a face-to-face class. Mm-hmm. Having a small group it's kind of like that first step in feeling connected in the class. So it's useful for everyone. I know when I've taken online classes, I tend to gravitate toward the people who I've done the group projects with, because those are the people I know. So it's helpful, and I think that's a way that it reduces the stress.
Yeah. So the other thing we want to stress here is that these benefits are not automatic. Group project that is not well designed, here, you need to make a video describing 5 reasons why people should wear masks. Just sort of that project isn't going to give students enough information, and it's not going to help them achieve these benefits.
Mary, before we go on,
Yes.
there's a question from the chat from
Yeah.
Olaf. How do you define small group?
How do you define small groups? So when we were creating, Christina Peterson from CEI, when she and I were creating the faculty teamwork site, we were thinking 5 to 7 to 9 students. So we're going to show you shortly an example of a project that Sue Wick has, and from biology, has had her students do, and I think they're in groups of up to 9 students. But generally for a group project, you're looking in that 5 plus or minus range. Again, it depends a little bit on the project. Okay. Any other questions before we go on? Okay. Okay, so Kelsey has a question about the parking. We'll put that in the parking lot for when we talk about forming teams. So characteristics of an effective group project. First, it needs to be an authentic task that requires collaboration as well as distinct individual contributions. Authentic is relative. It might not be 100% something students would do in your field, but something as close to as possible. And then it needs to have individual parts that students can contribute to. See, I'm talking with my hands, Alyssa, too. So there's that accountability both to the group and to for each individual. Okay. So thinking about authentic tasks, so those are tasks that a professional in your field might do. And there's a lot of examples, as Alyssa said before, about group projects, team projects on that CEI site. So for example, one of them, somebody in the Carlson School who teaches international business communications, the students have to identify, choose a country, research what it means to do business in that country, what sort of cultural factors do you need to consider, and then they have to plan a mock training that they lead their class, that they lead their peers through. So that's an example of an authentic task. In addition, the problem needs to be complex enough to benefit from multiple perspectives. And this also allows for that deeper learning. So here's another example. This is again from Sue Wick in biology. So in her class, and this is a paper she wrote about it, the students need to propose genetic solutions to societal projects. So first here they have teams of 9 and they have to choose a problem of interest and then use genetics to solve the problem. Okay. At the end, they then present their solution in a poster in a class poster session. And this is something that could be adapted to the online environment easily, doing a digital poster and having students present those in a gallery walk format. So this is another example of something that a professional in the biological field might need to do. And again, this is from our site, a matrix of some example group projects. So here's the intercultural training one that I just mentioned. Michelle Dreesen in chemistry, the students have to evaluate a de-icer using available chemicals, doing a web usability analysis, structured debates. But this matrix, if you were to take a look at it later on, clarifies how these different projects are relevant, authentic, and then well-defined. So the students know exactly what it is they have to do. Okay. So if you did open up the workbook that we gave you before, in the workbook, the link to the workbook, you can download that. What we'd like you to do is just take a minute and think about a team project for your course or discipline and reflect on, is it authentic and is it complex enough to benefit from a team working on it? So we'll give you just a minute or so right now to think about a project that you might have in your own class, and does it meet these criteria? And we'll have time for a couple of people to share their projects later if someone would like to. Yeah, Mark, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I could share one right now, Mary. Do you want me to?
Great, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I work in the Hubbard School of Journalism, Mass Communications, and each of the 3 classes that I teach, we have group projects in. The one that is focused entirely the entire semester is for strategic communication campaigns. And we have a team of 5, 4 teams of 5, and they work on a client. So I go out and secure a client from the real world. This year we worked on Best Buy. So we had a client from Best Buy. They gave us a project that they needed to reach the Gen Z target, which is perfect because our students are Gen Z. They are not doing a good job with marketing to them. So we developed an entire marketing campaign for them, and we presented it virtually. Usually it would be in person, but we did it virtually this year. And the feedback that we got from the Best Buy client was tremendous. She was extremely excited, and they're going to use some of those tactics as they move into the project. So that was a great example, real authentic, working with the client.
Great. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I have to pay attention to the advertising coming up and see if I can pick out anything. Okay. Anyone else like to share a project that you have in your course?
Well, this actually raises a question, because one of the things I teach in the history department, and I'm teaching a course in women's legal history that I've taught many years, but I'm fundamentally redesigning it for online. And one of the things that we'll be doing is a staged reading of a play written by a judge of a Supreme Court case involving the 22 lewd Chinese women who were barred from entering the United States in the late 19th century. And so it gets at all kinds of questions about, well, beginning of immigration restriction and the way in which that begins with women, but the students in the class will be performing the staged reading, but it doesn't involve all the students. And so one of the questions that I have about group assignments is, can you have different assignments over the course, different group assignments over the course of the term that involve different segments of your class?
I would say absolutely. Yeah, Alyssa's nodding her head too.
Yeah, I've done that many times actually, where there's a group of students responsible at different points in the semester. And maybe the rest of the class, so that it's not quite so passive for them, they're responsible for providing some sort of feedback or tracking just one person. And giving
Kelsey,
that one person feedback.
Kelsey, you had your hand raised before.
Yeah, I have a project that I think is authentic, but I'm trying to rework how it might work in teams. So before I've always had it individually completed, but it's something that students kind of struggle with. So genetics class, and one of the really big objectives is for them to practice accessing and using genetic information. So gene protein sequences on a common portal. And then delving into genetic diversity and some of the phenotypic outcomes from that. So delving into literature, summarizing relevant bits. So what I'm struggling with is, are there distinct roles there? I think they'd benefit from collaboration, from having somebody to talk through and clarify the information, but I don't know if there's enough meat there to really say there are distinct roles here.
Yeah, I mean, not being familiar with the topic itself, I can't say for sure, but I think assigning roles or having students take on different roles and responsibilities can be one way to approach that. Yeah. We have a couple of things in the chat here. So Lynette talked about writing a treatment plan. Sarah dividing the class into small groups and giving each group a computer box and ask them to take the box into parts, take out the parts, and then assemble the computer together again. That's a super fun project. So taking something apart and putting it back together, that's definitely something where multiple perspectives, no, I thought it was this way, no, it was that way, and then having students talk through, you know, if you disagree with someone, you know, make sure you explain why. Ashley asks, are there folks with group work success stories from high enrollment asynchronous courses? Anyone here have that experience?
Kelsey's no.
Yeah. And hi.
It's really the asynchronous bit that's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be something, Ashley, if you want to talk sometime offline, send me an email. We could brainstorm some things. Yes. Alice, develop a game that teaches or enhances the elements of creativity in your area of interest. Yeah, developing a game. I know David Beard at UMD, I think, has a very similar assignment. So great. Well, thanks for sharing. Why don't we go on? Alyssa, do you want to?
Sure. Yep. So now we'll kind of come back, actually, Kelsey, to what you, to the parking lot. How do we form these teams that we'll be working with? So, all right, I'm going to leave. Kelsey has a question in the chat, and I'm going to let you chat about that off to the side. Has anybody used weekly problem sets assigned to teams? So I'll leave that there for a second. How should I form teams? So Kelsey, you mentioned this in the chat earlier. I wrote it, copied it, that you've used incoming performance, demographic characteristic, mutual preference, random, which is kind of covered by the list we have here, right? So you can form teams randomly. You could use different criteria depending on a lot of different things. You could have students form their own teams, or you could do some combination of above. And in my experience, choosing which method really depends on what the project is. Is it like a small ad hoc kind of, you know, one time, we have this one synchronous session and I want students to work together? Maybe then I'll do it randomly. Is it going to be a longer term project, which is what our focus is a little bit more here? Personally, I would probably have, I wouldn't do it completely randomly in that case. If you can go to the next slide, Mary. But generally, what we like to stress is creating teams that are heterogeneous with respect to knowledge, skills, and perspectives. And that's good for a lot of reasons. So perspectives, that can help us achieve one of the university's learning outcomes, or in the mission statement, which is to really capitalize on the multicultural and the diversity that we have. So bringing groups together with the different perspectives is important for that reason. Different skills. We know that students who sometimes struggle with the content or knowledge, so I'm kind of conflating these two, knowledge and skills. Students who might be struggling can benefit from working with students who are not struggling as much. And the students who are a little bit stronger benefit by helping to teach. It just strengthens their knowledge. So it can be really mutually beneficial to create heterogeneous teams. Yes, Kelsey, and avoid tokenism, because that can be hard. Absolutely. So if a student is the only one of something, that can be difficult. Absolutely. So one thing to consider, this table is on the CEI website, the faculty guide. And again, I've highlighted assigning teams based on relevant strengths, experience, background needed for the project. One thing that's not reflected in this table, though, I think, is the online component related to time, which when students are asked, I read an article yesterday in preparation. If there were two things students could tell you about their experience with group work, it's that they don't like it because of social loafing. So somebody in the group who isn't contributing in a way that the rest of the group expects. And coordinating time. And so time might be one way to help. It might be one of the criteria you consider. I personally probably wouldn't do it based solely on time, but I might do at the outset of the class, say there's going to be some group work in this class. Could you tell me, what are the times that you're available? And asking some other questions about their group work preferences, and use that as a consideration, because that can help them meet at a certain, make it work so that they can work together. So I think that's a special consideration for online classes. If you have a synchronous component in your class, then you could certainly give students that time to work during your synchronous component and help alleviate those issues of needing to meet at a specific time. I want to come back to the question that Kelsey had earlier. What would be some advice for how to form stable teams when the mode is synchronous online? Does that address your question, Kelsey, or would you like to hear more?
Kind of like the kid in the candy shop thing, right? I have to decide what it is that I'm trying to get out of the teams, and then that would kind of dictate the priorities.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I don't know the answer yet.
It'll really depend on the project. Yeah, it'll really depend on the project. And so, for example, maybe like you were talking about problem sets, maybe there is a group, like a base group that meets throughout the semester, and they always, and you just know they're going to come together. But maybe there's another project and it's a different group of students who are working together. I like that approach.
Yeah, that's what I do in my class, is have the base groups. Yeah, Barbara, you have your hand raised?
I just learned how to do that, so a new skill.
Yay!
So my question is, what about, will you all be discussing having students evaluate, evaluate whether everybody contributed in the context of a group project?
Yes.
Terrific, thanks.
We'll be getting that a little later, yep.
All right. I think we can move on.
Well, let's move on then to our third topic here, which is about supporting positive team dynamics among students. So things to think about in supporting students. First, motivating them to get excited about the project, giving them time, and then also helping them develop the skills that they need to collaborate, to work together effectively. So going back, starting with motivation, one of the most important things I think is to sell the project. When we go back to that first activity we did with the word cloud, there were some positive words that people said, but there was a lot of groans, anxiety. Students sometimes are worried, how much time is this going to take? Who am I going to get stuck in a group with? Why are we even doing this as a project? I can do this myself. But sharing with students why the project is important to the course and relating it back to your learning aims or the student development options. Talking about why teamwork is important for them academically and professionally, and that their project will help them to develop this skill. And especially with online team projects, when thinking about the world we're in now, I was talking with my neighbor who's an engineer for Boston Scientific, and he used to travel, probably 30 weeks out of the year. And he was like, I don't see myself traveling that much ever again. We're doing everything online now. And so this is the reality when our students get into the job market, that they're probably going to be doing a lot of these sort of Zoom teamwork meetings. So helping them recognize that this really is a skill that will help them in the future can be a good way to motivate students. Another thing that's important is providing students with in-class time to work. So if you are in Zoom, if you're doing synchronous sessions, having some time for the students to get into breakout rooms and to talk about, to work on their project or get to know each other. Because as Alyssa was saying before, scheduling can be a huge challenge right now. And you can pre-assign breakout rooms in Zoom. The key thing is the students have to be logged into Zoom before they join the meeting or the class. And if they're not logged in already, then the pre-assigned breakout rooms don't work so well. And then giving students instruction on teamwork skills. So one of the things that you can do is have students devise a policy statement. So I know this is probably a little hard to read. We have links to this in on the CEI page. But what is it? How do we agree that we're going to work together? So this is a policy statement that Christina Peterson had her students do. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. No, it's not letting me blow it up. There, nope. That's not what I wanted, sorry. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Sorry, I blew something up and now I can't get rid of all this other stuff. Yikes. Alyssa, could you maybe share your screen? I'm not sure how to get out of what I just did.
Absolutely, I will share. I was actually going to try and bring up what you were looking for, but I will just go back to our presentation.
No, I was just trying to make the page bigger so people could see, but now all sorts of weird things are happening on my screen and I
Hold on one second. Sorry, everyone. We'll get there. We will get there. Okay, I think now you can see my screen. I have to adjust some things. All right, Mary, take it away.
Okay. Now I have to move this out of the way. So I keep talking to myself. Yeah, so a policy statement, you know, when are we going to meet? How often are we going to meet? How are we going to resolve conflicts? How are we going to make decisions? So these sorts of statements can help students learn how to work better together. And it also can save you time later on so that when students do have, for example, a problem with social loafing, somebody not doing their job, you can ask them to refer back to their policy statement. Well, how did you all agree that you would do this? What did you think? What did you say? And this is something you can have students do early on in the project so that one, they get to know each other. It forces them to start talking about their expectations. And then you can have them turn this in and just for points or something. And I saw Kelsey just said in the chat that she gives the students an option. Some courses have an option to kick a team member out. Yeah, I think that that's sometimes needed. Okay, next slide, Alyssa.
Yes, hold on. Now my screen is all.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep. So encouraging regular group check-ins. One thing I've heard faculty do in the past is every week or every other week, the students have to just turn in a quick paper. Everyone says what they did and related to the project, and the other students have to sign off on this. And that's just another way to encourage regular communication among the students to make sure that everyone is participating and doing their part. Mark has the team members rate their teams twice during the project. Yep, that's another thing that you can do is peer assessment, and we'll talk about that more.
And one other, just another, this is a more formal paper, but I've also read for online classes where instructors ask students to create a spreadsheet and basically log their meetings so that the instructor knows how often they're meeting. The instructor isn't necessarily listening in to see what they're talking about at their meetings, but more rather, are they meeting and is everybody participating? And it's a log of what everybody is doing, but it's in a spreadsheet in Google Docs, so it's easily shared. So it's not something that has to be uploaded every time. It's just a consistent log.
Yeah. Another thing I've heard people do is having each team create a Slack channel. So using Slack, and then adding the instructor to that and just telling the students that they need to do all of their communication within that Slack channel. And then later on, if there is some sort of a problem that arises, the instructor can go back and look and see what was going on. I can't remember who it was who told me that idea. And this person said that they don't go in and check the Slack channels very often. They just might look at them once in a while just to make sure things are more or less going smoothly. But it's nice there then because there's a record of all of the group communication. So that's another option that you could use.
Okay, sorry, I forgot that I'm in charge.
Yeah, you're in charge. Yeah. Another possibility would be what is Slack? Slack is an online communication tool. So you can set up channels, they're called. So for example, when I've done work with CFANs, I've had a Slack channel with them. So just the people that I work with, and rather than sending each other emails, we communicate within Slack, and it keeps all of the communication again then in that one space. So that can be something that can be useful instead of going through 50 emails. Where is that email from so-and-so? Yeah, okay, Kelsey, thank you. You said it better. Collaboration platform. Yeah. Another thing you can have students do is to have them assign roles. Let's see, you want to click?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so one student could be the facilitator this week, the next student be the recorder, another student present. So you can imagine instead of these students sitting around at a table, they're all sitting around in their rooms or wherever they are. But then having them switch roles so that everyone gets the experience of being the facilitator, the recorder, the presenter, and also to make sure that nobody is left out, so that there isn't that one person who takes over and says, okay, I'm in charge, I'm gonna run the show. But having these rotating roles can give everyone some skill development in these different areas. Next slide.
It should come.
Okay. It's not,
Okay.
yeah.
And then the video is actually on the next one. Do you want to say anything about the video before?
I think let's not do the video. Let's just talk, well, let's not show it.
Okay.
If you go to, again, we keep selling, this is shameless self-promotion. If you go to the CEI faculty guide site, Murray Jensen, we have a video of him talking about group roles. And what he talks about how he assigns roles, he has students do it from the beginning of class. And then the students just know that that's an expectation, and students really don't push back on that. So it's about a 3-minute video. So if you have time, I encourage you to go check it out.
Rebecca asked a good question about the kicking out clause, which is basically, are there any concerns that having a kicking out clause would really, inappropriately target a member of the team? And multiple steps. Yes, Kelsey, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Is Rebecca, when I first saw I've never used a kick it out clause, and my initial instinct was very similar. Like, whoa, what about? Because there are a lot of reasons why students might be socially loafing, and there might be a perception problem going on. So I think there needs to, as Kelsey has just said, there need to be a lot of faculty facilitation mediation steps in between there to figure out what's really going on. Because maybe it's not a kicking out, but a reassignment. I think, yeah, I might look at it as, I might try to reframe that myself. I like the idea of it in terms of it being student generated and realizing like, this would be unacceptable. But framing and again, really understanding the mediation that would have to happen in between to get the full picture.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have just something there so that students aren't at the beginning saying, I don't want to do a team project because somebody is going to throttle my grade by not contributing. So it's just a way for them to have the reassurance that, okay, if everything really does just all hit the fan, right? My instructor has thought through that there is just a mechanism in place.
Yeah, it is. I would call this kind of the nuclear option. It really is a last resort. And I think very few people have ever really had to exercise this. It really is an extreme situation. Yeah. Okay, next slide.
All right. Oh, that's the same thing.
Yep.
Uh-oh. There's the video. We don't want that.
We don't want that.
Okay, so moving on. Sorry we have used Zoom before, but I guess it's just not our day. Moving on to thinking about how to scaffold successful team projects. So thinking about scaffolding, there are a lot of questions that I think are important to consider, and basically using backwards design to scaffold the project. So when I say backwards design, I mean thinking about what course aims does this assignment or project address? So that's the first thing to consider. And then I like to think, well, what's it gonna look like? What's that final product look like? So for example, in the biology class, it was some sort of poster presentation. Okay, so that's what I'm aiming for. And then in an online course, where will the students submit their final project? So we probably won't be in a classroom, right? Like that biology example we saw earlier, but will students and this kind of goes hand in hand with who is the audience, project that's just submitted to the instructor, or is it something that's going to be visible to the whole class? Is it something that's visible, kind of like Mark, what you were talking about, something visible to a client outside of the class? Is it something like a blog post that's visible to the whole world? So just thinking about who that audience is and where that project will live at its completion. And then what are the tools needed to create the project? So I think those are the important questions, at least some, I'm sure there are others as well, but those are some important questions to answer before thinking about how to scaffold the project. And scaffolding is just supporting. So I like to think of scaffolding as there's a lot of different steps. And in an early scaffold opportunity, there might be more than one, but the first one or two scaffolded mini tasks should be really low stakes. So they're not going to be worth a lot of points. And they're intended to help students get familiar with each other as a group, get familiar with whatever that task is, and also the targeted technology. So these might be, opportunities for icebreakers. It might be time to do that, that group charter. Kelsey, go ahead, and why don't you share your fun, frivolous first task? We'll hear it. Why not?
Okay, so for biology class with lab, the labs have persistent teams across the semester. And so their first task is to actually come up with a team mascot, team name. And so for one of my years, I decided for them all to pick a dog breed name for their team. So I had 4 different lab sections. One lab was the toy breeds, one lab section was the herding breeds, right? I used the AKC group so that I knew what lab they were in. And they had a lot of fun. One year I used bird groups. And so there was a bit of taxonomy. I said, you have this family, so any species within this family. And so there was a little bit of content there too. So if you think of your subject area, you can think of what are there that they could have a lot of different examples of, but they have to kind of pick within a category. So then they adopt that team name, it becomes their mascot. It's great, good fun. They have a little picture, but then they have buy-in too. They have identity, and it's something they can do. And by the end of class, set up your team in Canvas and tell me what your name is or whatever.
Yeah, so Kelsey, I just have to tell you, one time my son's class had to do that, and they became the washing machine pandas. Go figure. But yeah, but that's, as you say, it's fun and it's frivolous, but it serves a great purpose.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's frivolous, because I think it's really kind of crucial for creating that team dynamic and getting that buy-in. So yeah, model organisms. So thank you. So, but that early scaffold task is to help people get acquainted with one another and also whatever the technology is. So I'm going to be sharing another, kind of walking through an example of this after the next couple of slides. Then a midpoint scaffold. These are going to be additional mini tasks that are a little bit more challenging. Okay, so they're going to keep building up their skills, either using more features of the technology, incorporating more of that content that they're targeting, but basically it's building up, but it's still not the final product. Okay, and then finally, the end result, students are able to focus on whatever it is that they're creating. So if it's a proposal to a client, if it's this poster for the biology course, and they're able to do that with more confidence and really focus on the course aims, but they have already kind of overcome any sort of technology hurdles by the time they get to this last step, because you have already required them to submit other drafts early on. Okay, the penicillin pack. All right. Any questions about scaffolding before I move on to an example of this in action?
The chat's really fun right now.
I know, but you guys are having too much fun in the chat. That's good. That's good. It's all part of community. All
Can
right.
you show again the middle step, Elizabeth?
The middle step? Sure. Sorry. So basically, they're just subsequently more difficult. So you don't have your Eiffel Tower yet, but it's taking form. You think it could be the Eiffel Tower. Okay.
Or the Empire State Building.
Or the Empire State Building. Actually, I think that might be the Empire State Building. All right. So here's an example of scaffolding in action with a recorded online group presentation. So the idea here, it says Module 9, Module 11, Module 13. Obviously, you can change that based on your course needs. But the early scaffold opportunity, students connect in Zoom and they present and record one slide of their presentation. Or if it's their poster, maybe it's just the poster. There's not a lot of content on it, but they just have the poster outline and they record it with one voice. Not everybody in the group is recording. And they submit that they would for their final project. So depending on the presentation, it could be in a discussion board. It could be in a voice thread. Maybe they're doing it in Flipgrid. Whatever the tool is, they just submit it in that spot, wherever the final will be, because then they are getting used to doing it as it would be expected in the final draft. Then at the midpoint, students will, again, connect in Zoom, and that could be during your synchronous session, or they can arrange to do that on their own time, depending on how you have your course set up. And then they record the outline of their presentation. And in this case, each group member is required to speak so that each group member gets practice speaking. They can identify any troubleshooting that might happen in that occurrence. This assignment is worth more points, but it's still not, it's not the final draft. So there's slightly higher stakes, but still, I would say, relatively low stakes. This could also be a good place to include peer and self-assessments, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or a place for peer feedback. So I'm kind of looking at assessments in different ways. Assessments of the group functioning, this is a good check point to do that, thinking about group dynamics. It's also a time to check on the content of whatever it is that they are producing. Okay. And then the final project, they can share their final project and submit it. So if it's, depending on how public that is, they'll submit it, but they've been practicing submitting it this way the whole time. Does that help kind of operationalize how the scaffolding would work? Can you give us the directions for students to form a group for communicating with each other on Canvas? There are a couple of different ways to do that, if I'm not mistaken, right, Mary? I mean, you can set up groups in Canvas and groups can communicate with one another. You could set up a discussion board where they are just communicating with their group members in a discussion board. You could encourage them to set up their own method of communication. So like Mary was saying earlier with their Slack channel that they set up themselves. Do you have anything you would want to add, Mary, or anybody else with other ideas?
Yeah, I'm just putting in the link to the help page on using Canvas groups.
Any other questions about the scaffolding? Okay, then we will move on. Oh, the links that go into the chat. Barbara, we will be, there will be a email that's at the end of the presentation, and it'll link to a folder, and we'll put these links in that document. So we'll mine the chat afterwards and do that. So I think some of the questions that I'm seeing come up in terms of giving points, we'll be covering in the next section about assessment. And then in terms of, is the example of presenting one slide, would all students talk? So, so for example, in the early scaffold opportunity, not necessarily, it could just be one student speaking. In the second scaffolding opportunity, it's really up to you or the students if I'm understanding the question correctly, but each student could have their own slide that they speak about, or it could be one slide and each student is speaking about that one slide, kind of like Mary and I have been going back and forth, even though we're talking the same slide. I hope that answered the question, Christine. Okay. So now Mary's going to tell us more about assessing team output.
Yeah, so this is a question we often get. How do you assess a group project? Our recommendations are that you assess both the team and individual performance. So how can you do that? So if you want to go to the next slide. So again, these suggestions come from our site. So team output, you could grade submissions for each of the scaffolded steps that Alyssa just talked about. And it's really important, of course, to have a clear rubric with criteria and descriptors. Sometimes we'll hear from people, from faculty instructors saying, I don't want to tell them too much. I want them to be creative and figure things out. The problem with that can be sometimes they're so busy trying to figure out what you want that they don't spend as much of their creative energy coming up with these great ideas for the project. So giving them that rubric can be really helpful and can help them to actually be more creative. You can assess individual understanding by doing individual quizzes or exams. So, you know, if there's some major topic that everyone's learning about, doing it, you know, quizzing them that way. You can also have them do reflective writing on the content and the process. I have a son who's a student at UMD, and in his writing, he had his advanced writing class last semester, and they had a group writing project. And one of the last assignments he had to do was write a memo talking about what he contributed to the project and reflect on what he did well and what he could do better. So that would also be another way that you could assess individual understanding. And then finally, process and contribution. So here's when you could do peer evaluations, team evaluations, and also self-evaluations. I talked a little bit before about an accountability document where everyone specifies what they did, and then everyone else in the group has to sign off on it. On our site, we do have some examples of different type of peer evaluations that you could use. Sometimes people will say, okay, you have 100 points to allocate to everyone else in your group. You can't give, you know, the other 4 people each 25 points, and then you have to justify your rationale somehow. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I think Mark, you said something. Mark, did you say something earlier in the chat about doing peer evaluations?
Yeah, I do exactly kind of what you're talking about there. They do things, they evaluate themselves. They evaluate their peers. I let them give points to the association. Also have them talk about what they contributed in the group. You know, what were their key contributions. So it's done a couple of times a semester, and it seems to work out well. I love the thought that you just had about don't give everybody 20 points. So you add up to 80 or whatever the number is. But to really focus on this is a real life experience, because when you get your jobs, guess what? You're going to be evaluating your peers. So learn how to do it here and learn how to work good in a group.
Yeah. And something else that you just mentioned that brought this to mind for me is helping students learn how to give each other feedback and give each other effective feedback is really important. Rather than saying, oh, you did a really great job. Well, what was really great about that? What specific things did, you know, Alyssa do that you thought were really important for the success of our project? Or, you know, is there something that Alyssa could have maybe, you know, she could have responded to emails a little bit more quickly, which I'm just joking. Alyssa's always very good about responding. But helping them to learn how to give that constructive feedback is also really important. That's part of teaching those teamwork skills. And then learning how to accept that feedback and that it's not necessarily personal, but it's to help with growth. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, and we'll have a few minutes left for questions. So just to wrap up, some things to keep in mind. When you're designing your project, you know, strive to have a task that's authentic and requires both collaboration as well as distinct individual contributions. Try to have diverse teams as much as you can. Give your students the motivation, the structure, the time, and the skill development training that will help them to be successful. And scaffold assignments to support a successful team project, giving them those little baby steps along the way. And finally, assessing both team and individual performance. So that is what we have, and we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Either pop them in the chat or just unmute and ask away. Or if you have an idea that works really well for you that you'd like to share with others. Or if you want to go soak up the sun.
I'd love to hear from those who have used group projects in different ways about the question of interpersonal dynamics. In the course that I'm teaching, there's a lot of material that is emotionally loaded and divisive. So for example, we'll be talking about abortion as one example. We'll be talking about rape and race. We'll be talking about a lot of issues that are hard to talk about. And so I wonder if, for those of you who have used group projects, how interpersonal dynamics enter into challenging issues.
Can I comment on that? It's more from a student perspective. When I did ethics class, and the teacher had us choose a topic. So the group that was interested in abortion or dealing about ethics related to rape, they were grouped together. So that kind of supports what Alyssa was talking about. No, not Alyssa, sorry, I can't remember names. About the individual's characteristics, like-minded, even though they might have slightly different perspectives, but they're more mind-like because they chose the same topic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like, if you're gonna have a group project about sensitive issue, then have the students choose which topic they want to be in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great thought. Even if the topic itself of the subject of the group isn't a sensitive subject, other material that the students will have been dealing with in the course will be sensitive, and they will have differences of opinion and experience that, even though it's not even related to the group project, then they will be potentially thrown together. So
yeah.
Barbara, I don't have the link, and I'm for some reason not able to open my other Google windows right now, my other internet web browser windows. But I know that the University of Michigan has some good sources on how to facilitate challenging discussions. So we will include that in the resources, because I think that that's important. It's a really important consideration, and that it's one many of my classes haven't delved into really sensitive topics. And I think that can be exacerbated in an online setting because of the asynchronous communication. So what Kelsey was saying was talking about classroom climate, creating some in the course charter, like, how can we express things so that we can get our points across. And I know Mary and I both use sentence stems because we teach second languages, but I have seen in the literature that using sentence stems can be really useful for all classes. So sentence stems are things like, you basically give the start of a sentence, like, in my opinion, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's a very simple sentence stem, but providing that framework for how to express an opinion is beneficial for a lot of different learners to express themselves, and kind of gives us the framework in order to do that. So just really quick off the top of my head, some ideas.
Thanks, and I'll look forward to those links.
Okay. Scaffold book club, interesting. Yeah, and also Mark asked a question about how do you help students give feedback. We actually we have something we use for our undergraduate TAs. So in our program, we have undergrad TAs who help us with the international TA program. And their job is to give feedback to the students, to the international TAs on their teaching and on their language. And one of the things we do is with them is practice giving good feedback, effective feedback. So I can also put that into a page on Google and share that later on too. So, well, we're at 2:02. Thank you all very much for joining us today. And you'll be getting a follow-up email later on we will mine all of these links. And feel free to reach out to Alyssa or I anytime you have questions.
Absolutely.
Always happy to help you troubleshoot and problem solve and brainstorm. It's one of the things we like to do the most, I think.
Yeah, I love brainstorming.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us. And we'll hopefully see you soon at something.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, everyone.
And thank you to the group.
Yeah.
Yes, this is rich.
Yes.